Hello there, and welcome to Journey to Recovery. We appreciate your listening. Our podcast today is titled Moving from Resistance to Acceptance. Today we'll learn strategies to turn reservations, hesitancy, and resistance into willing acceptance, cooperation, and lasting change. Our host is Dr. Hal Baumchen, a licensed clinical psychologist and licensed alcohol and drug counselor. He is an author, speaker, and clinician with over 30 years of counseling experience. I'm here along with Tim Bode and our host, Dr. Hal Baumchen. Hey there.
Hi, Gaylen. How are you today, Dr. Hal?
I'm good. I'm always good. Today we're going to talk about acceptance and resistance. You ever get resistant, Tim?
I do sometimes.
Yeah. Gaylen?
Oh, yeah.
Great. Yeah. I don't want to.
Well, when other people don't have ideas as good as mine, I'm resistant to their ideas.
Yeah. Here's a funny one. My daughter is an engineer, and one time we were arguing a bit, and she told me something, and I'm like, I don't know if I want to. I don't really know if that's right. And she said, well, if you want another opinion on that matter, I can give you my opinion again. So I think a lot of people get like that.
Yes.
They're resistant, defiant, oppositional. They challenge what you say. They're not sure if they can accept it. So we're going to try to talk through that in the context of treatment. So when somebody needs help, maybe they're struggling with an addiction, we're going to take a look at what is it like for them to receive help and also to just accept, hey, I've got a problem.
Right. I'm sure it's really hard to get anything out of treatment if you're that way, resistant and argumentative and just have a bad attitude.
Right. It shuts you down and makes you more defiant. And we're going to talk about this later, but I'm fond of saying hard hearts don't soak much up. So when you are resistant like that, what's going to get inside?
Right.
So let me see if I've got that. Acceptance of the problem, acceptance of the goal.
Yeah, and we'll talk later about accepting help, too. So accepting the problem, I've got a problem. And then what's the goal? The goal is abstinence or recovery, or I got to change up my life or something. So that's going to be the goal. And then you've got to be willing, probably. Okay, let me say it this way. You have to be willing to accept some help.
Right. So those are three critical areas of accepting treatment, right?
Right.
So, Dr. Hal, do some clients who come in with addiction and co-occurring mental health disorders enter treatment hesitant or even opposed to getting started?
Yes, and we're going to talk about somebody who even gets forced against their will to come to treatment.
So why is that? Who forces them?
Yeah, a couple of different things. One of the things that can happen is just a probation officer or the court system or a judge saying you have to get treatment. Failure to get treatment, you're going to have more severe consequences. The second area, big area, is just family members and friends saying, and even an employer, you have to get treatment or we won't give you your job back or something like that, or a family member who's giving an ultimatum, get treatment or else. And then also, I think circumstances push on you. You've lost money, lost a job, lost a relationship. You're going to lose your house. And so your life is swirling down the toilet, so to speak. And those circumstances force you to get some help.
Mm-hmm. I imagine that all those things can leave someone feeling bitter or even resistant.
Yeah, so again, I'm feeling forced, and when you force me, make me do something against my will, shuts me down and makes me more resistant. If they had their way, they may not come at all, or perhaps they delay treatment until much later, perhaps thinking like, I don't really need treatment anyway, at least not yet, or let me try this on my own.
Mm-hmm. Isn't it difficult then to work with somebody who's reluctant to engage in treatment?
Well, it's like pushing string, yeah. I would say it's difficult. It is one of the challenges in the field. I'm sorry. It is hard, Gaylen.
That's a great example of difficulty.
Yeah. It's like getting 12 cats to agree to jump into a cardboard box. You know, they keep popping out on you, and 16 guys in treatment. They can be oppositional, defiant, and resistant as well. Sobriety and recovery can and do occur. What's necessary is that even if you start out in a kind of a resistant way, I see many people start to soften and accept, this is what I need to do for my life. I've got to have some lifestyle changes, and I'm going to get treatment.
Mm-hmm. I imagine that those feelings of resistance and reluctance that they have don't start at the doorway of the treatment center, though, do they?
Yeah, they start before that, and we hope that when they walk into the treatment center, maybe they begin to soften. That resistant feeling, Tim, can begin way in advance of walking into treatment.
Mm-hmm.
The addiction itself, when I'm thinking about it, is filled with denial. I don't have a problem. It's not a big problem. You drink too. Why can't I? Everybody has some kind of thing. You're going to die of something. So addiction, I think by nature, is a disease that's steeped in denial.
And of course, we know denial is a river in Egypt.
Mark Twain said that actually, not just a river in Egypt.
Yeah. Well, denial then is the inability and reluctance to admit that the person has a problem.
Yeah, or a minimization of the problem. We've been talking about that, a hesitancy to own the severity of the problem. I suppose you could call it a problem, but it's not that bad. I've seen a lot worse, they might say. Mm-hmm. And people often have trouble admitting that the addiction has gotten worse and it's actually taken over a greater part of one's life. And that addiction problem begins to cause a variety of life problems.
Mm. Can you give us some examples of that?
I wrote some down, just a few notes about a guy named Denver, and he's actually from out west, so I gave him that name just so that I wouldn't use his real name and I would forget his real name over time. He's 48 years old when I met him and married for over 20 years, and he had several adult children. And he was referred to our treatment center by a Rule 25 assessor. That's somebody who's going to look at the severity of your alcohol or drug use. And the assessor also determines what level of care he might need based on the severity of the problem that he's dealing with. And he had a long history of drug and alcohol use and abuse, but he had recently gotten into a domestic quarrel with his wife, and his wife ended up getting a restraining order against him, and that was one of the things that led to his need for treatment.
What was his drug of choice?
He was using methamphetamine and he was using alcohol as well, and he started to drink pretty heavily toward the end, and he was working in construction. So it became kind of a lifestyle thing. He used the methamphetamine to stay up in the roof and shingle or to stay on the job long enough and work hard. And then he was also using alcohol. He started using methamphetamine on and off at the age of 17. And then he had a period of sobriety, which things went a little bit better. But he would periodically go back to the methamphetamine, get himself in trouble, maybe go to jail again. And then he told me that he had been in jail 25 separate times. So maybe he would get arrested, or then he would not pass a drug screen, go back to jail. It's called a probation violation, and he'd be in jail for a little while, and just kind of revolving door in the jail system.
Sounds like a lot of jail time.
Yeah, it does, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And some of those, I'm sure, were over the weekend. Others were longer stays, like several months.
You know, with a history like that, it doesn't seem possible that there could be much denial about his problem, does it?
Wow, I got a problem. I got to get this fixed. And I don't know. It must be like that frog in the kettle thing where you start thinking like, this is just because somebody squealed on me or I was unlucky or something, but it's not that big of a problem. Amazingly, he managed to minimize how serious his problem was at the very moment, when I met him. And he spoke in terms that indicated like, I used to have a problem. But the truth is, it was gaining momentum on him, and I think his problem was becoming more severe. And he had very little acknowledgement that his problem was as severe as I thought it was. And when he came to treatment, he knew that he had a problem and that he needed to do something about it.
Had he gotten into more trouble at that point?
Yeah, he had that domestic charge, and he had a drug possession charge, and he had failed a recent UA, and his marriage was in serious trouble. He'd been married for 20 years, and I think, he was going to get a divorce or she was done with him. And he had damaged the relationship with his children, which they were adults, but that was still important to him. And he was currently out of work. So a lot of things coming together.
And did all of that serve as motivation for him for treatment?
It sure served as motivation for me. I'm like, man, you got a problem. You're gonna have to get some help here. And I think it did, Tim. I think he began to, see it, especially when he'd get sober, like, wow, what have I done? So, yeah, I think he began to see that.
It kind of seems like the addiction itself so blinds a person that they don't see the truth.
Yeah, they can't see the truth. And again, minimize it, deny it, rationalize it, justify it, but have trouble seeing it for what it really is. Then when these guys get clean and sober, yeah, I think they can really start seeing the truth. Even the consequences are severe, like they were for Denver. Addicts can have the uncanny ability to ignore that truth, like you were saying, Gaylen.
So how can we help somebody who's resistant like that?
Well, it's helpful for everyone coming into treatment or thinking about treatment to examine your own hesitancies, to look at your own reservations when you start saying, like, maybe I should get some treatment or at the beginning of treatment. This can be helpful just to examine your own thoughts and your own beliefs about getting help. Are you the kind of person who's reluctant to receive help from somebody? I don't need help. I can handle this by myself. Treatment's stupid, costs money, takes time. Those reluctances, take a look at yourself. See if you can do a thorough examination of what's going on inside of you.
With the kind of history you're talking about, mistrust and caution would be likely, even expected?
Yeah, if he's been mistreated or poorly understood or treatment hasn't worked in the past or in jail 25 times like we talked about, I think you start thinking the system doesn't help me, treatment doesn't work, nobody understands my problem. It's always my hope that everyone in a treatment setting, and even their family members and friends, would remain empathic and compassionate and encouraging about getting the treatment you need.
You're not going to get much help if you can't accept that you have a problem.
Right. I don't need to take a shower. Well, you're not going to take a shower. I don't need to get gas. You're not going to go to the gas station. You're just going to run it out of gas and smell real bad when you get, out of your car, I guess. So you're going to have the consequences because you just didn't see that you needed to do something.
Dr. Hal, do new clients come in and have a hard time trusting the treatment center?
Yeah, I think the more of the difficulties you've had in life, those consequences, can I trust you to help me and will it really work? When people have been misdiagnosed or mistreated, misunderstood, it certainly makes it more difficult to believe that this treatment center is somehow going to be able to be different this time around. And people have trust issues. You've heard me talk about this before. Have trust issues in two directions. I don't trust people that I should, and I end up trusting people that I never should have gotten involved with. So I don't trust the judge, the police officer, the treatment center, the counselor, or the priest, but I end up trusting the drug dealer, the gang member. So you end up having trust issues in two directions.
So you basically end up trusting those you should, not trusting those you should, and trusting those you shouldn't.
Right. In general, people should trust the judge and the probation officer, like I mentioned, and not trust some of the other people. Like, wow, I think they're dragging you down and damaging your recovery.
Yeah. Dr. Hal, can you talk about the common resistances that regularly occur at the beginning of treatment or even before treatment begins?
Yeah, I think we mentioned a couple of them already. That big one that Gaylen brought up was denial. I don't have a problem and I don't need help. Denial is pretty unsophisticated, pretty raw in terms of defense mechanisms, and I'm not taking responsibility for problems and not taking responsibility for the consequences that follow the problem, and I'm not facing what needs to be done. So denial is a big factor there.
What's the second common resistance?
The way I see it is just the stigma that's attached to getting help or admitting you have a problem. And so it's embarrassing, and I'm filled with shame about it. So I don't want to admit to it. And when you go to a treatment center, you're saying I have a problem, and people are reluctant to do that. So we call that stigma. And the stigma is part of the resistance package for somebody with an addiction problem.
I can see where that would block a lot of people from getting the help they need.
Yeah, they're resistant, they're in denial, they're embarrassed and ashamed. And also that third layer of resistance is just doubt. Does treatment really work? Will it work for me? Will it help this time? Will I get better? Are you going to understand me? Am I going to get the right medications? Is this the right place? Should I do it now? Should I do it later? A lot of doubt. Uncertainty and insecurity go along, and that creates that third element of resistance.
I suppose on the other side of the argument, we'd kind of have to say that treatment can be intrusive into someone's life, can it?
Absolutely. It costs time and money. And when we look at a guy like Denver, we talked about him a couple minutes ago, he had quite a list of his own reservations.
Can you name some of those for us?
Yeah, I don't know if I mentioned this to you, Tim, but he had, I think, 20 previous treatments. So, hey, is 21 going to be any different?
Right.
And so I've heard this all before and that sort of thing. So I think that adds to that level of resistance. It's not really stigma anymore, but it's that doubt and mistrust of the system.
I'm sure he's wondering, why would this be any different?
That led him to believe that his case was different. I'm different. You don't understand me, and this doesn't work for me. So we have to slow down and say, I really think that you're making some progress here. So let's stick with it.
And I suppose some clients believe that their problems are more severe than anyone else's.
Not only that, but some clients feel that their case is not severe enough to warrant treatment. So both of those, mine is too severe, or I don't really have a problem, that minimization, so I'm not going to get treatment.
You mentioned he had a job. Did that cause any reservation or hesitancy on his part?
Well, it didn't so much for him, but it sure does. I have a job, so I can't afford the time for treatment, and who's going to feed my family, and what are you going to take care of them? So I think sometimes the commitments that people have in life and job and family keep them from getting the treatment that maybe they need.
Right. They say things like, I don't have time, I can't get off of work, takes too much time, it's too long, all those kinds of things, too much of an inconvenience.
Right.
Too much money. Right.
Yeah, all of those.
All of those reservations, yeah.
The key to a successful treatment recovery is to admit or accept that you have a problem. That's going to be the beginning point for everybody. Resistance, oppositionality, defiance, any kind of reluctance, it's all going to make treatment more difficult. It will be more difficult to keep yourself in treatment, and it's going to be much more difficult to get anything out of it. Well, Gaylen, I think maybe that's all we have time for, and we'll have to come back to this subject again, I think.
Well, thanks for listening to today's podcast. We've been visiting with Dr. Hal Baumchen, a licensed clinical psychologist and licensed alcohol and drug counselor. His expertise and clinical wisdom is now available at journeytorecovery.com. Share this resource with your peers and colleagues. I'm Gaylen Morse. Thanks for listening, and see you next time. Remember, recovery is a journey. Enjoy the ride.